Hello, Pete. Welcome to the show. We're excited to have you back on All Ears English. How are you?
I'm good. G'day, Lindsay. How are you going?
I'm going great. I'm going great. Guys, today on the show, we have Pete Smissen back for another guest episode from the Aussie English podcast. Pete, when did you start your podcast? How long have you been around, just in case our listeners don't know about your show?
Man, I have to think about it. I think I started right at the end of 2015. So I think I was a latecomer. I think you were well and truly on track. You were probably past about 1,000 episodes by that point, but you were out there. I remember. But yeah, so about 7 years ago, far out, maybe 6 to 7 years ago.
But that's already been a long time. I mean, you're practically a veteran at this point. I love it. And so
It catches up with you. Yeah, you just keep going.
Absolutely. You just keep going. You love it, right? So, guys, today we have Pete on the show to talk a little bit about Australian culture and what we might need to know if we're going to be visiting Australia, either from the US or from abroad. We're going to compare Australian culture with American culture. Pete, where in Australia do you live? Where are you based?
So I'm in a town called Curlewis, which is outside Melbourne. And you have to
Okay.
say that Americans always say Melbourne
We
because of
do.
the spelling,
We
but
do.
it's a schwa sound on that second syllable. Melbourne.
Okay,
Burn,
let me
burn.
try it.
Go
Melbourne.
for it.
How's that?
Yeah, you crushed it. You crushed it
Oh.
like an Aussie, fair dinkum Australian. You did it. You did it. It's one of those things that the American pronunciation of place names always jars us sometimes, but then you
Yeah,
forget like the spelling is very, very confusing. So yeah,
it
but
really
I'm
is.
from outside of Melbourne, which is in Victoria, the southeast of Australia.
Okay, I love it. And so it's such a different place, right? I love Aussies. I love Australian culture. I've never been there, but I feel like I always get along well with people from Australia. So let's dig into why that is.
Well, I think we're
Yeah.
pretty laid back, right? We're pretty
Yeah.
laid back and informal and friendly, at least by and large. And probably the people you get to meet, the ones who leave Australia and want to travel are probably also, pretty friendly and open. The same way the Americans that we meet in Australia, you're not going to meet very many very, very conservative people from the South, right? In America,
Yes.
traveling through Australia, you're going to meet the people who are kind of open minded and learning languages and love the world and want to travel and everything.
That's true. But I have noticed that Australians do tend to travel a lot. When I was living in Asia and Japan and even South America, I met a lot of Australians. Is that something that's really baked into the culture, the value of just getting out of your own country?
We have a sort of cultural practice of when kids finish high school, there's a gap year. Quite often, there'll be a gap year. So instead of
Okay.
going straight into university, I think you guys would call it college, right? We'd call it
Yeah.
uni,
Right.
university. Kids will quite often take a year where they'll go overseas. So they
Okay.
might go learn a language in a different foreign country, or they may go somewhere like America or Great Britain. Quite often those two. So it'll either be the
Oh,
Americas or it'll be Europe somewhere, often
okay.
Britain, and they'll get a job, just see what the world's like, travel a bit, and then come home and then go to university instead of just doing that education, for like a big 20-year period or whatever it is, a
Right.
12-year period all the way through.
Yeah, I love it. See what the world is like. I really wish that we had that embedded into American culture. I would say we don't as much. I would say, I mean, things may be changing now with people working online and kind of doing more of their own thing. But I think most people go to college and go to
Yep.
graduate school or go into the working world. There isn't this moment where it's go see the world as much
But is it
as in
kind of
Australia.
internal? I think you guys kind of, the cultural thing from what I understand and from the shows and everything that I've experienced and people I've spoken to is that when you go to college, you'll often go to one outside of your state, right? Or you'll
Yes.
travel away from where you grew up. You won't just go to the college down the road, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I went to Virginia. So I went from New Hampshire down to Virginia near Washington, D.C., about 500 miles. We do have the
Wow.
concept of
Okay.
go see America, right? The American
Yep.
road trip is such a classic journey in our literature, in our
So many
lives.
horror films start off with that.
Right. Don't camp by yourself and, in the deep South. Have you seen True
Exactly.
Detective? No.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. No.
Oh.
So yeah, that's really, but I do wish we had a little bit more of that. So I'm excited today, Pete, to talk about, you're going to let us know three key differences, things we should be
Yeah.
ready for if we are going to go to Australia. What would be the first thing that stands out to you?
I think one of the biggest things that I hear from both English speakers like Americans and people from overseas, and we'll start, I had this as number two, but number one here would be the Australian accent is quite often seen as very difficult to wrap your head around, at least for that first week or two, right? It gets people off foot, right? They kind of arrive and they're like, oh crap, I thought it was just Is that all right to say? Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No, keep going. Keep going. I didn't even. No.
They get here and they say, oh, I had no idea that there was going to be this, different accent. It's going to be really hard. I've learned American English or British English, or I'm from America or Great Britain. And I get here and I'm like, geez, this is really not what I expected, especially with the broader accents. So we'll have more nasally kind of like, how's it going? Where you from? Okay. Kind of regional pronunciation and accents at times.
Right.
So that's one of the biggest things, getting used to the accent. And I think too, a big thing is that we don't produce anywhere near the kind of media or content or movies or podcasts or films that America and Great Britain do, right? Like everything is American. So as an Australian, I can hear American accents and quite often pick more or less where people are from, maybe what class, potentially even what race they are, because of the amount of exposure that we get from American TV shows and films, and we love it. But you forget that Americans aren't watching Australian films and TV shows like we are watching yours.
Although we'd like to. I mean, I would like to. I wish there was more of that. I don't know why our media is so American and UK centric. It's true, isn't it?
And all our good actors, though, disappear over to America and make it big there, because that's where you make your money, right? Like Chris Hemsworth. When was the last time you saw him in a show where he has an Australian accent? He uses an American one.
Sure. And of course, Nicole Kidman, she's Australian, isn't she? And I didn't even know that until a couple of years ago. So you're right. They do get kind of absorbed into Hollywood, into using the American accent. Is there a part of Australia that we should be ready if my listeners are going to be going there? Where is the accent the strongest? Sydney, Melbourne? Or
it's kind of different from Great Britain and from America, where we don't really have these strong regional dialects. It's kind of mixed up everywhere. And so you typically 90% of the people you'll come across speak with a general accent like me, right? It's just a sort of, this is the kind of easy to understand middle of the road accent. It can be sort of divided up into three accents. The broader accent, which is that like kind of speak a bit more in the nose. It's a bit, the vowels are elongated a bit, and that's often associated with regional areas. So like out in the country a bit. Okay. It's kind of like, I guess, your American drawl, like howdy y'all.
Okay. That makes sense. Out in the South and in the West. Sure. All right. So you have that one.
That's it. And then again, this isn't 100% accurate, but there used to be the cultivated accent. These things have sort of changed over time, but the cultivated was closer to RP, received pronunciation from Britain. Okay. But really, you're going to come across the general, and then maybe a few of these sort of slightly stronger accents, especially from men quite often, that are, say, quote unquote lower class or from regional areas, where they just tend to have this stronger kind of how's it going kind of accent going on.
Sure. It reminds me a little bit of, Southie. I don't know if if you've ever seen Good Will Hunting, in the US, that movie where he's from Southie, and he has a very clear, I guess, blue collar accent. And I'm not sure if that term is appropriate anymore, but sort of it's a middle class sort of, these accents label people in a way, right? Yeah. Which can be really challenging when we're trying to do different things in the world. Okay. So good to know. Different accents, watch out for the accent, right, Pete? That would be the first tip.
Yeah. And for the strategy, you wanted some sort of actionable things. I would say if you're planning to come to Australia and you want to just kind of slide right in easily, I would say, obviously, get exposure to the accent ahead of time. Listen to, obviously, my podcast, the Aussie English podcast. Listen to Australians in TV shows and films about Australia. There are websites like ABC, iView, and SBS, which are free, and they have TV shows. They're kind of like Australian Netflix, so you can get on there online. If you might need a VPN, but they're available. So do a little bit of research and work first, and get some exposure. Okay.
So you think just kind of exposing, getting the ear ready to hear that. And then when it comes to being there, we'll be ready to react. We call it like opening the brain box, getting the brain ready to hear that accent. And then we'll understand it better when we're there. Yeah.
When I went to France, when I was a kid, I used to speak French. I was learning it at school. Oh, nice. I remember coming across someone who was from Quebec, and I thought they were speaking another language, because I was just like, what the hell? But the person they were speaking to was replying in French from, Parisian French. Sure. And when I spoke to them, I was like, this is so hard. And it was because I hadn't had exposure. So if I was going to go to Canada, if I was going to go to Quebec, that would be the thing I'd do. Okay. And to be watching shows, listening to podcasts or audiobooks, and trying to get that initial exposure.
Yeah. And it's so easy to do that now, guys. So that is Pete's first recommendation. Just be exposed to the Aussie accent. I love it. Okay. So that's the first thing. What would be the second thing, Pete, that our listeners should be ready for?
Slang, all the
Oh,
slang
man.
that we use.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Right.
we use a lot in just day-to-day language, where if you were to ask the average Australian about Australian slang, I think a lot of the time they won't even realize the word or the phrase or the expression that they're using is slang. They'll just think
Mm,
that's what they're called, right? Like thongs, right? We use thongs
right.
for what you guys would call flip-flops
Flip
or
flops.
potentially sandals, you know? So
Yes,
we use thong to mean that, whereas you guys use thong to mean what we would call a G-string. And so there's quite
exactly.
often some funny reactions that happen there. There's an Australian comedian called Carl Barron, and he does a skit on it where he's like, I went to America and I was like, I can't find my thongs. And they were like, what the hell? Why would you have one thong, let alone two? And he's like, to put on my feet. And
That's
they were just like,
hilarious.
what?
I
So
love
yeah,
that. I love that.
that's a common trope.
Yeah. And I do want to let our listeners know, guys, Pete was on the All Ears English podcast a few years ago. We should get that episode number. Guys, go ahead to allearsenglish.com and type in Pete Smissen, and you will be able to find this episode. We did a whole episode on
Yeah.
slang, Aussie English slang. So, guys, check that out and we'll go into more depth over there. So, be ready for the slang. What should we do if we hear it? Should we ask for a translation? Should we step back? What's the action? What's the recommendation?
I would obviously just say, you would ask again, right? Ultimately, it's about communication. You want to understand what
Yeah.
the person's saying. And we know, like, if you were to arrive in Australia tomorrow, Lindsay, and I was just like, g'day, do you want to go to the servo and get a slab for the barbie?
Oh my
You'd
gosh.
probably be like, what the hell is this guy talking about? But I would understand that, new American just come to Australia. I probably can't just use that language.
Yeah.
And I would explain. And it almost becomes that point of, oh, yes, I get to explain to a non-Australian what these words are and,
It's
encourage
kind
you
of
to
fun.
use them.
Yeah, because it
Yeah.
always
So,
says, yeah, go ahead. Mhm.
well, yeah. So servo is service station or petrol station, gas station, as you guys would say.
Okay.
A barbie is a barbecue.
I knew that
So
one. I didn't know that one.
Yeah, you'll have that one. That's a common. Let's chuck another shrimp on the barbie.
Yeah.
A slab is a box of 24 or 30 beers or bottles of beer, like beer
Okay.
cans or bottles of beer. So you get a slab full of 6-packs usually,
Yeah.
and you take it to a party, to a barbie. You might get it from the servo. So we have a
Sounds
lot of those
fantastic.
kinds of slang terms that we use all the time and don't realize it. And
Yeah.
we love hearing when other people do it. So if you came here and you suddenly learnt those words, even if you were to use an American accent, we might poke fun at you, but
Sure.
in a friendly kind of way. But we love it. We love hearing other people come and then using this language with us, because it shows they're kind of adopting the culture, embracing it, and wanting to be a part of it.
Yes, it definitely does. It shows respect when you do try to use the local slang with people. And guys, in the end, it's about connection. So it's about getting, we're talking about going to the beach or going to a barbecue with beer. It's about the experience that you're going to have with the locals. It's not about getting tripped up in the language. So use the language, use the slang, attend the event and connect, right? That's the key. I love that. So good.
And I always tell people, if I were to have, say, an American come up to me and say, hello, sir, how are you? Versus, say, someone from India who came up with a very strong accent and said, g'day, mate, how's it going?
Right.
I would instantly feel more comfortable with the person who just used the language that I speak, right? The g'day, mate, how's it going? I would be like, okay, he's probably in Australia, understands Australia, whereas the American, I'd be like, they're already kind of making it formal. It feels a bit uncomfortable. I'm not sure, do they, there would be a bit of distance there.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting how that kind of happens with language and how you use it. And it doesn't matter if you're a native speaker or not.
Right.
If you adopt these kinds of words and the culture behind the language and then use it, you actually end up developing those connections much more quickly and sort of subconsciously with people that you're speaking with. So it's a great way to connect.
Yeah, I love that, Pete. I couldn't have said it better. That's it, right? Language can either be something that pulls you apart because you feel that distance in the language you're choosing, the vocab, or brings you together, guys. So choose to use the local slang. All right, I love it. So what would be the third thing that we should be ready for? I feel like this is kind of in line with the second one, more or less. What is it, Pete?
Yeah, well, I was going to combine, I had a few here, but informality in Australia, that's a big thing. And the slang kind of ties into that. And a big thing I hear from people, I had a few students from Colombia and they were like, I don't want to learn informal language. I don't want to learn swearing. I don't want to learn slang because I would never use that in Spanish in Colombia. And I was like, I understand, but you're not in Colombia. You're in Australia. And I would never say you need to use something you're not comfortable with, but I would say be aware that the system here is different. The way that we interact is more informal. You're going to hear swearing more frequently. You're going to hear slang words more frequently. And it doesn't have the same kind of cultural meaning that it probably does in Spanish in Colombia. So that's as well, you kind of have to separate those two things. The same way that if I went to Japan, I would have to suddenly learn all of the honorifics and how to behave more formally. And I wouldn't be like, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm just going to be informal with everyone.
Course.
It's kind of like you have to dive in and be like, well, how do they interact? How do people interact here? So Australia is much more informal by and large. And a good example would be, this is something I always see on American films and shows. You guys referring to everyone as sir and ma'am, right? Like if a policeman pulls you over, you'll be like, hi, sir. And it just feels so weird because it's almost patronizing in Australia. I had a story where I was working as a waiter, and an old gentleman came in and he was wearing a suit. And I said, can I get you a seat, sir? And he told me to F off and said, my name is Dave. My name is Dave. Do not call me sir. And I remember
he was actually offended.
Oh, that is so Australian.
But he was legitimately offended. He was
angry. Yeah. He's like, I'm not your dad. I'm not your grandfather. You just call me Dave.
Okay. But was that more of like an age thing that he felt like you were speaking to him like he was old, or that you were showing too much respect and it created that distance? Or was it a little bit of both? What do you think?
It's hard to know, right? Yeah. But I would imagine it's probably a combination of all of them. And I'm the same. Yeah. When I walk up to a store and I want to buy something, maybe some food or something, and the person there, quite often they'll be, say, Filipino, right? Or from Indonesia, and they're very polite and they use that kind of language. Immediately, I'm kind of like, oh, don't put me at arm's length like that. Don't call me sir. I'm not up here. Yeah. I'm just normal like everyone else. And that ties in with tall poppy syndrome.
Yes. Tell me about that real quick to finish up the episode. Yeah. Because this is a little different than in the US, I think.
So Australians really, really don't like people who toot their own horn, right? Yes. So people who blow themselves up and they want to show off and they want to be like, I'm successful, I'm better than everyone. That's that idea of the poppy, the flower being taller than all the other poppies.
Right.
We kind of like to chop that flower and bring everyone back down and remind everyone that they're mortal. So we don't like tall poppy syndrome, we call it. And so quite often as a result, you'll see things like politicians in Australia and even, billionaire miners using much more informal language on TV in order to show that they're just your average Aussie battler, dude. So when they interact with people, they'll always be like, oh, g'day, mate. How's it going? And that's the Prime Minister of Australia. So it is
interesting. Okay.
It is just a different culture, a different way that we look at formal and informal. And we still have formal situations, in the workplace, at job interviews where you will use more formal language. You still probably won't use sir or ma'am.
Yeah.
But then in interactions, quite often there's a friendlier vibe. I feel like you will be intentionally trying to make things informal to add that friendliness and also bring yourself down and show I'm just a normal person. I'm not better than anyone else. So
right. Yeah, because it's hard to relate to that person that's up here on that pedestal, isn't it? It's just really hard. It's almost like they're not human. How do we connect with someone that's not human? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it probably comes from us being a country of migrants, and also obviously the convicts who came over when we were colonizing the place. The convicts are the ones who ended up staying here, and all of the rich gentry and soldiers and politicians and everything would come over and then go back to England, and we hated them, right? The convicts hated them. So there's probably that aspect to it where they were constantly being like, we hate those guys, pretending they're so much better than us.
Interesting.
Strategy wise, I would say, you don't need to do anything you're not comfortable with when you're developing your language and how you're speaking with people. Don't assume because someone swears that they're swearing at you. That's a big thing too.
Okay,
I've heard a lot of people tell me this person was using these words, and I was always like, what's the context? Because they can use those words whilst not at all being trying to offend you or being nasty to you.
Right.
And then lastly, it would be get used to what people around you are saying and doing, and try and match it if you want to copy what they're doing. So, I mean, you don't have to do it if you don't want to with swearing, but if you are, say, working somewhere and there's a whole bunch of guys and you're a guy and you're trying to blend in, you want to become part of it, and you hear them swearing, then obviously in that situation, it's probably okay to swear. So
yes, totally.
you have to kind of just gauge it and work it out and do what you're comfortable with doing.
Yeah. I mean, this is a certain social intelligence we need to hone, right? To build that and understand the context, where are we at and what's needed in that moment to connect. I love it. So good.
Exactly.
So interesting too, that tall poppy syndrome. I feel like it's a little bit different in every country. You know, I noticed that in Japan too. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down, right? That's
it's
the
that
proverb
same idea. Yeah. Except
yeah.
I think that's more of a utility thing, right? Where
yes, you can't get anything done if certain people are trying to stand out. Right. And it all comes back to the history of each country. I love it. I feel like we could explore this even more another day, Pete, but we got to wrap it up for today. Good. Where can our listeners find your show or your website online? Where can they find more of what you do?
Just do a search for Aussie English, and that's spelled AUSSIE. Aussie English, and you can find my YouTube channel, Instagram, and website, aussieenglish.com.au. And yeah, I'm sort of like Lindsay. We cover all sorts of advanced English, but it's through an Australian lens, where we'll talk about Australian news and current affairs, but also more broadly English, you know, that you can use everywhere. And don't be afraid to dive in and learn a bit of Australian English. You can still communicate. Lindsay and I have no problem understanding one another. Exactly. But if I go crazy with slang or whatever, I might just have to explain things the same way that Lindsay might if she uses some very specific language from in the US.
That's it, Pete. You got it. I love it. So guys, go over and find Pete's podcast and hit follow on that show right away. Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show today again for the second time, Pete. And we hope to have you on again soon. This has been great.
No worries. Thanks for having me and looking forward to number 3.
Sounds good. Take care. Bye.